It started with a flicker of hope. That stubborn little ember that glows quietly, even after years of being doused by indifference. I lit a candle that morning. A silly thing, really, a tiny vanilla pillar from a gift basket someone gave me at the church Christmas party last year. I put it in the center of the kitchen table and struck a match like I was summoning something ancient. Maybe I was. It was our 40th wedding anniversary. I'd gotten up early to cook breakfast, made everything the way Richard liked it. Bacon crispy, eggs with just a dash of cream to keep them fluffy. I even sliced a grapefruit in half and sprinkled a bit of sugar on top before broiling it, just the way his mother used to when we were newlyweds, and she still thought I wasn't good enough for her son. I brewed the coffee strong and set the table with the bone china we hadn't touched since Emily's wedding. I wanted to create something beautiful. One last offering, maybe. Or maybe I was clinging to the fantasy that today, of all days, he'd remember. When Richard came down the stairs, he was already halfway into his phone, thumb scrolling, eyes half lidded. His tie was crooked, his hair still damp from the shower. He smelled of aftershave and hurry. Didn't even glance at the table. He set his briefcase on the counter and said, "What's all this?" I swallowed. My throat felt tight. "It's our anniversary," I said. He looked up for a moment, blinked like I'd just told him the wrong date. "Is it?" he muttered. Then a shrug. "Huh. Well, I've got a meeting at 9. That was it. No kiss. No card. No memory of the day I walked down the aisle toward him in a handmade dress with my mother's brooch pinned over my heart. He poured himself a cup of coffee, glanced at his phone again, and muttered something about traffic. I watched him walk out the door, briefcase swinging, as if 40 years of my life didn't just lie cooling on a white linen tablecloth behind him. I sat there long after the eggs had gone rubbery. My hands trembled a little. Not from anger, not yet, but from the slow, creeping chill of realization. I wasn't loved. I wasn't cherished. I was tolerated. After a while, I got up and put everything away. Every dish, every fork. I rinsed out the coffee cups and wiped down the counters. The candle burned low unnoticed, until it finally flickered out on its own. That afternoon, I climbed up into the attic for the first time in over a decade. Richard always kept it locked, said it was just storage, but I knew where he hid the key. I found it once when cleaning out the junk drawer in his office, tucked inside an empty Altoids tin. The attic smelled like insulation and forgotten things. Dust danced in the sunlight cutting through the tiny window. I moved aside boxes of old tax files, holiday decorations, and a dented cooler from our last beach trip in 2006. That's when I found it, a box marked M's things in his tidy handwriting. Inside were scraps of our life. My high school graduation program. A few Polaroids from our honeymoon in Gatlinburg. And beneath it all, a red leather-bound journal. My diary. The one I'd started the year we got married and stopped writing in when Emily was born. I thought it lost in the move from Charleston to Raleigh. Apparently not. I flipped through the pages, heart thudding. My words. My voice from a lifetime ago. October 12th, 1985. He said, "You know I only married you because I had to, right?" I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I kept reading. Small things. Sad things. The way he used to sigh when I spoke. The way he forgot birthdays. The way he would praise other women's cooking at dinner parties while never once complimenting mine. And I had recorded it all, quietly, faithfully, like a woman trying to convince herself it was all normal. And then, a folded piece of paper. A letter. From Richard. Dated 1981. "Dear Elaine, I can't keep doing this. Margaret is the right choice. The safe one. But she'll never be you. Elaine." I remembered her. She worked at the bookstore downtown. Short black hair. Always wore red lipstick. He said she was a flirt. Said she didn't mean anything. I sat there, knees stiff from the cold floor, and stared at that letter until the words stopped making sense. My whole marriage, our whole life, built on obligation and fear. I was the safe choice. The backup plan. That night I made dinner. Chicken marsala. His favorite. He never noticed my silence. Never asked why I'd spent the day in the attic. He didn't see the way my hands shook as I handed him his plate. He never saw me at all. But I had seen enough. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I laid there beside him, staring at the ceiling while he snored softly, oblivious. Every so often he'd grunt or shift, the mattress dipping under his weight, and I'd turn my face toward the window, watching as the streetlight outside cast long shadows across our bedroom wall. I used to find that sound comforting, familiar. Now it grated like a slow leak from a broken pipe, constant and wearing. At some point around 3 a.m., I got up and padded downstairs. The house was dark, but I didn't turn on a light. I moved through the rooms by memory, my bare feet finding the creaks in the floor like they always had. I went to the den, where we kept the filing cabinet, the locked one. Richard never let me near it. Said it was for work stuff. Contracts, client accounts, taxes, none of my business, according to him. But that night, I wasn't thinking about rules or boundaries. I was thinking about 40 years of blind loyalty and a single red journal that made all of it unravel. I pulled the key from the same Altoids tin that had given up the attic key, slid it into the lock, and opened the drawer. Files, dozens, labeled in his neat block handwriting. W-2s, investment accounts, real estate holdings. I didn't even know we had more than one property. I pulled out the folders and started reading. One by one, the puzzle came together. There were properties in his name, yes, but also in mine. Accounts I had never heard of, some joint, some solely in my name. A small beach condo in Wilmington, a cabin in the Blue Ridge, and bank statements that made my stomach drop. Tens of thousands, in and out, hidden from me, yet using my signature. Then I found it. A line in a business agreement with a law firm header. Margaret W. Thomas, co-founder, 51% owner. What? I looked again. Co-founder, owner, of his clinic? The one he built from the ground up? That couldn't be right. He always said I was just support. A glorified secretary in the early years. He never introduced me as a partner, never even hinted I had a stake. I turned the page. There it was, my signature, not a copy original ink. I remembered it now. A day 20 years ago when he'd rushed in from work, said something about needing to show good faith to an investor. It's just paperwork, he said. You're my wife. It's all ours anyway. I signed it, because of course I did, and he never brought it up again. I sat back in the desk chair and stared into the dark, the only sound in the house the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. My fingers felt numb, not from the cold, from the weight of it all. He had made me legally responsible for things he never acknowledged, had hidden money under my name while telling me we were just scraping by, had built a life on a foundation I unknowingly held together. And all this time, I thought I was just the support beam. Turns out, I was the whole damn structure. I put everything back in the cabinet, careful to leave no trace, and locked it again. That morning, I made breakfast like always. Eggs, toast, coffee. He came down late, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and mumbled about needing to leave early for a conference call. I nodded, said nothing. He didn't know that I knew. Not yet, but I had plans now. Later that week, when he left for an overnight trip, supposedly to a medical board meeting, I took my time. I pulled out my little notebook, the one I'd kept tucked inside the piano bench, and began to make a list. Every account, every file, every property. I made photocopies, scanned documents, saved backups to a USB drive, and dropped it into a worn leather clutch I hadn't used in years. I called a lawyer, a woman, Sharon Delgado. Her voice was calm, warm, and firm. I told her everything. Not all at once, but enough. She didn't sound surprised. That hurt more than I expected. We met for coffee the next day. She wore a gray blazer and red lipstick that didn't smudge when she sipped her latte. You have more power than you think, Mrs. Thomas, she said, her eyes scanning the file I handed her. Legally, emotionally, financially, you've been erased, but you're still here, and they can't erase what's written in black and white. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something stir. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper. Resolve. By the time Richard returned from his so-called conference, I had already filed the preliminary paperwork. My name was officially attached to a legal case number. Divorce, asset evaluation, partnership dissolution. The whole thing read like a financial crime novel, except the villain still whistled in the shower and put his shoes on with a grunt every morning at 7:15. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I started talking again, not to him, but to myself. At first, it was quiet, just whispers while I folded laundry, thoughts muttered under my breath while I stirred the soup. You're not crazy. You remember it right. You're not overreacting. I started journaling again, picking up where the red leather diary left off. Only this time, I wasn't writing for memory. I was writing for clarity. Every time I felt unsure, I wrote. Every time I caught myself doubting whether I had the right to feel betrayed, I wrote. And soon, those doubts got smaller. They didn't disappear, but they shrank until they were just noise, background static I could finally talk over. Richard, for his part, didn't notice the change. Not at first. He was busy with his routines. Mornings at the clinic, lunches with clients, evening phone calls he took behind closed doors. But I noticed things, like how his voice dropped when he answered unknown numbers, how he stepped into the garage for calls, how he smelled like cologne I hadn't bought, cologne that smelled faintly of citrus and sandalwood and something desperate. I didn't accuse him. I documented him. One night, while he was sleeping, I went into his wallet. A receipt. Dinner for two. Steakhouse. Asheville. A boutique hotel's name scribbled on the back. I wasn't even angry. I felt still, like someone watching a train go by, knowing it wasn't their stop. The next day, I took myself out to breakfast, wore my nicest coat, sat by the window of a little cafe on Main, ordered waffles and coffee, and read the local paper cover to cover. No one looked at me. No one asked about Richard. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't half of anything. I was just me. That was the morning I decided to reclaim everything that had been hidden behind his shadow. At home, I dug out boxes of old paperwork I hadn't touched in years. My tax returns from before the marriage. My father's watch. A binder of notes from the community college courses I never got to finish because Richard needed help with the clinic. I laid it all out on the dining table, the same one we'd shared for every Christmas and birthday and Wednesday night meatloaf. And I cried. But not out of grief, out of recognition. There I was, my handwriting, my thoughts, my name. I called Sharon again that afternoon. I want the house, I told her, and my name off everything that's his. She was quiet for a moment. That's a strong stance, Margaret. I've been quiet for 40 years, I replied. I think it's time I started taking up space. Richard noticed something was off that night. I could see it in the way his eyes darted across the room when he walked in. Like he sensed a shift in gravity. You okay? He asked. I smiled. Never better. He didn't press. Later, I caught him looking at me across the kitchen. Really looking. Like maybe for the first time in years, he saw a stranger standing where his wife used to be. And I thought, good. Let him wonder who I am. Because I was wondering that too. And I was starting to really like the answer. There's something eerie about walking through a home you've lived in for decades and realizing it doesn't know you anymore. The walls held photos of vacations where I smiled through clenched teeth. The kitchen held a calendar I kept religiously updated with his meetings, his dinners, his deadlines, never mine. And the bedroom held a closet full of beige, navy, soft pastels, clothes that blended in, just like I had. After filing, Sharon encouraged me to prepare emotionally for pushback. He won't take this lying down, she said. Men like Richard rarely do. But I wasn't worried about his anger. I was worried about my own voice, finding it and keeping it steady. That came easier than I thought. I started with the mirrors. One morning, I stood in front of the full-length one in our bathroom. For a long time, I just looked. The woman staring back at me wasn't young anymore. Her hair had grayed at the temples, and there were faint lines around her mouth and eyes. But her spine was straighter than I remembered. Her eyes were clear. Tired, maybe, but clear. I didn't see a victim. I saw a witness. To everything. And witnesses carry weight. That day, I cleared out half the closet. Not because I had to, but because I wanted space. I packed his things with care. Folded them neatly. Placed them in the guest room closet, When he came home that evening and noticed, he paused in the doorway. Why are my clothes in the other room? I didn't look up from the book I was reading. Because I needed space. He blinked, as if trying to parse a language he hadn't heard before. We're not doing this, Margaret. You're upset. Let's not turn this into something messy. Oh, Richard, I said softly, it's already been messy. You just never noticed because I cleaned up after it. That night, I slept alone in our bed and didn't miss his presence at all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of subtle but seismic shifts. I went to the hair salon and let June, my stylist of 20 years, cut off 4 inches. She hesitated when I asked, Are you sure, hon? Absolutely, I said. Cut off everything that's weighing me down. I updated my will. I started attending yoga at the community center. I bought a set of watercolor paints, even though I hadn't picked up a brush since Emily was in elementary school. Each day, I reclaimed something tiny, something long buried under schedules and silence. Richard, meanwhile, began to unravel in quiet, undignified ways. He forgot to pick up dry cleaning, misplaced his office keys, left the garage light on all night. I could see the strain around his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. But he never once asked what I was doing with all my sudden outings, all my phone calls. He didn't know how to ask. He only knew how to be needed, and I had stopped needing him. One afternoon, I came home to find him in the kitchen, holding the red leather diary. He'd found it. I didn't panic. I didn't try to explain. He turned to me, face unreadable. Why didn't you ever tell me you felt this way? I laughed, not cruelly, but honestly, because you never asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, set the diary down like it burned. Then he said the quietest thing I've ever heard from him. Did you ever love me? It was the first real question he'd asked in years. I did, I said. But you didn't love me back. Not really. You loved the idea of me, the usefulness of me. That's not the same. He left the room. I didn't follow. I went upstairs, sat at the edge of the bed, and wrote in a new journal. He finally asked a question, but it's too late for answers. I received a letter from Elaine. Yes, that Elaine. It came on a Monday morning, in a pale blue envelope, tucked between a Bed Bath & Beyond flyer and the water bill. At first, I thought it might be a sympathy card. One of those quiet, perfunctory notes women sometimes send each other when they hear about a divorce through the grapevine. But when I opened it, the past came spilling out like a perfume I hadn't smelled in decades. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still elegant, deliberate, with that strange little curve on her S. Dear Margaret, it began. You don't know me well, but I know you. I have for many years. I wasn't going to write. I didn't think it was my place. But something about turning 60 made me braver than I've ever been. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's just time. But I need you to know something. I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. My hand trembled just enough to make the paper whisper in my grip. Richard and I were over before you married. That's true, but we never really stopped. Not for years. Even after you had Emily. We'd meet when he traveled. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself lies, same as he probably did. I thought you didn't love him, that you were only there for convenience. It wasn't until I read his letters again, years later, that I realized how much I let myself believe what made it easier to live with. I stared out the window, past the rose bushes I'd planted the summer after Emily was born. Back then, Richard had come outside with iced tea, watched me dig in the sun, and told me the pink ones wouldn't survive the heat. He was wrong. They thrived. Elaine's letter continued. I didn't write to beg forgiveness. I doubt I deserve it. But I thought you should know he never told me he loved you. Not once. Not in any of the letters. He admired you, respected you. But his heart, as twisted as it was, never left me. There it was. Confirmation. Not just of the betrayal, but of the choice. That he had chosen to live a lie with me. Year after year. And never once offered me the truth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the red diary. Then I picked up the phone. I called Emily. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp and distracted, probably elbow deep in meal prep or wrangling the twins. Mom, what's up? I filed for divorce, I said. A pause. Oh, wow. I didn't think you'd really go through with it. I let that sit for a beat before saying, there's a lot you don't know about your father. About our marriage. Emily sighed. Look, I don't really want to get into. I'm not asking you to, I said gently. I just wanted you to know that I'm done. With pretending. With silence. Okay, she said after a moment. Okay. She didn't say I'm proud of you. She didn't ask if I needed help. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't brush me off either. That was something. Later that evening, I stood in the doorway of the study, the one Richard always claimed for himself, the one with the dark wood bookshelves and the leather chair I never sat in. I held a single box in my hands, one small box filled with my essentials. The rest I didn't want. He came in a few minutes later, briefcase in hand, tie loosened. What's that? My half, I said. The pieces of me I'm taking. He looked at the box, then at me. You're leaving? No, I said. You are. The papers were served this afternoon. I gave you until Friday. His mouth opened, then closed. He blinked like he'd been slapped. You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life. I turned and walked away. That night, I lit a candle on the nightstand and wrote in my journal. He asked if I loved him, and I think I did once. But love, like roses, needs sunlight, and I've been living in shadow for too long. The morning Richard moved out was unseasonably warm for March. The kind of day that tried to trick you into thinking spring had arrived early, before another cold snap would inevitably remind you who was still in charge. I opened all the windows. I didn't want the house to smell like him after he was gone. He came with movers. Professional. Efficient. Not a box out of place. I watched from the porch swing, the same one where I'd once nursed Emily as a baby and listened to cicadas hum through the heat of summer nights. Back when hope still whispered in the corners of our marriage. He didn't speak to me. Not really. Just a few clip questions. Where do you want the tools? Did you see the check for the final invoice? His voice was tight, his jaw set, and in a strange way I pitied him, because I had made peace with what he never could, the truth. When they loaded the last box into the van, he lingered on the porch steps, looked out across the yard like a man trying to memorize something he never really saw in the first place. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I believed him. That's what made it worse. But you did, I replied, in ways I didn't even feel until you were gone. He nodded. His mouth worked like he wanted to say more. But there was nothing left. Not for me. Not for us. The van pulled away and the house, our house, exhaled. That night, I didn't sleep in our old bedroom. I couldn't. Instead, I pulled the quilt from the guest room closet, made myself a nest on the living room couch, and turned on an old black and white film. Something with a little grit and a lot of silence. I lay there listening to the creaks of the floorboards and the wind through the window screens, and I realized the house sounded different. Not emptier, just clearer. Like when the static finally clears from a radio station and you can hear the melody underneath. The next morning, I walked every room with a notebook in hand. I took inventory, not of objects, but of meaning. The green vase in the hallway, that had been a wedding gift from a couple we hadn't spoken to since 1989. Into the donation pile. The silver-framed photo of Richard with some board members? Trash. But the pressed wildflowers Emily gave me in second grade? Those I kept and framed. It became a ritual. 1 room a day. Strip away what wasn't me. Make space for what might be. I also started talking to people again. Really talking. Velma from next door brought over banana bread. We hadn't spoken beyond passing hellos in a decade. She sat on my back deck and poured lemonade while I told her the story. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to see her eyes narrow with indignation and widen with surprise. I always knew there was something off about him, she said. Men like that don't hold your hand. They hold you hostage. We laughed, cried a little, then laughed again. And I started to feel something I hadn't in years seen. One afternoon, as I was pruning the rose bushes, I found something buried under the soil. A small tin box, rusted, dented, but still sealed. I didn't remember burying it. But inside were old letters, scraps of poetry I'd written in my 20s, and a photograph of me in a sundress, standing in the very same garden. I looked happy. Not content, not useful, happy. I took that photo inside, framed it, and placed it on the mantel. Let him keep his plaques and certificates. I had that girl again. That night, I wrote in my journal, there's a different kind of silence now. Not the one that comes from being ignored, but the one that follows truth, that grows in soil where lies no longer live. This silence doesn't hurt. It heals. 2 weeks after Richard moved out, I stood in line at the DMV. I'd filled out the paperwork the night before, double-checked every field, and signed my name at the bottom with a pen that didn't shake this time. Margaret Thomas. For 40 years, I signed that name. At doctors' offices, on school permission slips, on checks that kept the house running. But that day, I asked them to change it. Back to Whitaker. My maiden name. My father's name. A man who taught me how to patch a bike tire, balance a checkbook, and stand my ground without raising my voice. A name that felt like warm cornbread and porch light moths and the sound of my mother humming while folding laundry. When they called me up to the counter, the clerk barely glanced at the form. Just stamped it. That's it, she said. That's it. But to me, it felt like rewriting a book I hadn't realized I was allowed to edit. Later that day, I stopped by the little antique shop downtown. I hadn't been there in years, not since the time Richard made a comment about how cluttered places like that gave him a headache. I wandered through aisles of mismatched china, dusty chandeliers, and time-worn books until I found it, a brass nameplate. The kind that fits on a desk. Blank. Waiting. I bought it. Brought it home. Sat at the kitchen table with a Sharpie and wrote in block letters. Margaret Whitaker. It was crooked. A little messy. But it was mine. That night, Emily called. The divorce papers had made their way through town, as things always do. She sounded hesitant, like she was testing ice that had cracked before. I heard you went back to Whitaker. I did, I said. It feels good. She was quiet a moment. Then, you sound different. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. Instead, I asked about the kids, about her job. And for the first time in a long while, the conversation wasn't one-sided. She asked how I was, what I was doing, what I wanted to do next. It was a start. A few days later, Sharon, my lawyer, called. We've finalized the financials, she said, and you're in a better position than I think you realize. She emailed me the full report. Properties, investments, accounts Richard thought I'd never touch. The years of quiet bookkeeping I'd done hadn't gone unnoticed. And when all was said and done, I didn't just walk away with half. I walked away with power. That same day, I received a letter from Richard's office. Typed. Formal. He wanted to renegotiate certain terms. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in an envelope, and wrote 2 words across the front. Return to sender. That night, I took the nameplate, set it on the little desk by the window, and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, This is who I've always been. Now she finally gets to speak. There's a strange peace that comes after the storm. Not silence, not exactly, but a different kind of noise. Softer, honest, like the sound of your own breath in the morning when you wake up alone, but not lonely. That's how the house felt now. Honest. I painted the dining room. It had been Richard's favorite shade of beige. He claimed it made the space feel professional, but I wanted color. So I picked a deep green, the kind that reminded me of pine trees after rain. It took me 2 days, 3 paint rollers, and a playlist of old folk songs I hadn't heard since college. When I finished, I stood in the middle of the room and cried. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it finally felt like mine. I started volunteering at the library downtown on Tuesdays. They needed help with the archive room, organizing donations, and digitizing old town records. It was quiet, dusty work. But the quiet was different from the one in my old marriage. It was chosen. A woman named Ruth worked the front desk, retired schoolteacher, brisk and observant. After a few weeks, she invited me to sit with her during breaks. You've got that started over glow, she said once, sipping black coffee from a travel mug covered in cat stickers. I laughed. Is that what this is? She nodded. Yep. I've seen it before. Usually happens after someone stops asking for permission to live their own life. One Friday, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name handwritten across the front. Inside was a thick envelope and a photograph. It was me, younger, laughing in a field with Emily in my lap, maybe age 5. Her curls were wild. My smile was real. The note inside read, I found this while cleaning out Dad's old photo boxes. Thought you should have it. E. I traced the edges of the photo with my thumb. Maybe she was starting to see me too. The next Sunday, I hosted brunch. Just a few friends from the library and my old neighbor Velma. I set the table with mixed-matched plates, fresh tulips from the market, and a quiche recipe I found in a cookbook buried in the pantry. No one asked where Richard was. No one mentioned the past. We laughed, loudly, without apology, and for the first time in my life, I realized I could fill a room without shrinking to fit inside it. That night, I lay on the couch, legs tucked under a quilt, diary open in my lap. I wrote, they say a woman scorned is dangerous. Maybe, but a woman rediscovered? She's unstoppable. It came in a manila envelope, thick, official looking, the kind of envelope that made your stomach tighten before you even touched it. It was from Richard's lawyer. A formal request to reconsider the asset division, couched in polite legalese, but clear in its intent. He was unraveling. He had lost more than he expected, and now he wanted to claw some of it back. I didn't even open it right away. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, put on my softest cardigan, and sat by the kitchen window where the morning light hit just right. Then I read every word. They made it sound like I'd taken advantage, like I hadn't been a silent partner in every success he'd ever claimed as his own, like I hadn't scrubbed the floors of his office before the first patient ever walked through the door. My hands didn't shake this time. I drafted a response myself before Sharon ever got a chance. I wrote it not as a rebuttal, but as a reckoning. Dear Richard, I began, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that after all these years, your pride still outweighs your gratitude. You talk of fairness now, but fairness never once crossed your mind when I was spending nights alone while you traveled for work. When you poured my name into contracts without offering me a seat at the table. When you used my silence as permission. I did not take from you. I reclaimed what was mine. This is not revenge. This is reality. And for the first time, it's mine. I printed it, folded it, sealed it in a fresh envelope. Then I added a single photocopy from the red diary, just a paragraph. One that detailed the night he told me years ago, you wouldn't survive without me. And I ended my letter with, turns out, Richard, I'm not just surviving. I'm blooming. Sharon called the next day. I told her I'd handled it. She laughed. You're a force, Margaret. No, I said. I'm just finally free. That weekend, I visited the beach house. Yes, that beach house, the one in Wilmington I never even knew we owned until I dug through those old files. It was small, simple. 2 bedrooms, faded shutters, and a porch with wind chimes that hadn't moved in years. But it smelled like salt and pine and possibility. I brought a stack of books, a bottle of red wine, and a blanket my mother had crocheted before she passed. And for 3 days I wrote, pages and pages, about the girl I used to be, the woman I had become, the years I'd given, the voice I had reclaimed. On the 3rd night, I stood barefoot on the deck, the wind wrapping around me like a whisper, and I said out loud, to the sea, to the stars, to whoever was listening. I was never his shadow. I was the whole damn light. Spring came soft and slow that year, like a child waking from a nap. The tulips I planted months ago, quietly, privately, broke through the earth with defiance. 1 row of pinks, another of soft white, and right in the center, 1 bold red bloom, alone and perfect. I named her Eleanor. No reason really, just a name I'd always loved. A name that sounded like someone who didn't ask permission to be whole. I had been journaling almost every day now. But instead of writing about grief or betrayal, I wrote about rediscovery. I jotted down what made me laugh, what made me ache in a good way, what I cooked for dinner, who I saw on my walks. It wasn't dramatic, but it was mine. Then one rainy afternoon, Emily stopped by, unannounced. She stood on my porch holding a store-bought pie and a look I hadn't seen on her face in years, uncertainty. Can I come in? She asked. Of course, I said, stepping aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the one Richard never liked because it was too small, too cottagey. But I loved it. I always had. We had tea and a few polite sips of pie before she finally spoke. You were right, she said, twisting a napkin in her hands. About Dad. About how he treated you. I didn't answer. I used to think staying quiet was noble, like you were doing it for us. But now I see. You were just surviving. I exhaled, slow. Yes. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. The kids and we saw this and thought of you. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. On the charm, a single word engraved. Resilient. I'm sorry, Emily whispered, for not seeing it, for letting him erase you in front of us. Tears welled, but I didn't let them fall. I reached across the table and held her hand. You see me now, I said. Weeks later, I was asked to speak at a local women's retreat. Sharon had recommended me. The topic? Reinvention. I stood at the podium, wearing a dress I bought just because I liked the way it made me feel, not because anyone else approved. I told them everything. The diary, the marriage, the letter from Elaine, the way a woman can vanish slowly and quietly, right before everyone's eyes, and the miracle of waking up before she's gone for good. When I finished, the room stood in silence, and then applause. Not polite, not obligatory, real. Later, a woman approached me, probably in her 30s, tears streaking her cheeks. She said, You just told my story. I didn't know anyone else had lived it. I squeezed her hand. Now you do. I live quietly now, but not invisibly. I teach a journaling class on Thursday evenings. I go dancing on Saturdays with Velma and Ruth. Our hips don't move like they used to, but our spirits sure do. And I spend Sunday mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and reading back through my old diaries. Not to remember the pain, but to honor the woman who walked through it. Her name was Margaret Whitaker, and she wasn't just a wife, or a mother, or an accessory to someone else's legacy. She was the author of her own. And now, she writes her ending in her own ink.